California Dreaming, the Inside Man. This is episode 2 of The Dark Ledger, presented by Elearn College. The story begins with a warm California evening, the kind of night where the sun lingers on the horizon as if reluctant to let go of the day. The breeze drifting in from the Pacific carries a gentle saltiness, and the glow of the streetlights casts long, lazy shadows across the sidewalks of Long Beach. In 1997, life in Southern California felt like a blend of opportunity and illusion. It was a region that promised everything: wealth, reinvention, escape. But beneath that sun-soaked surface, people often hid motivations far darker than their surroundings suggested. And on one particular evening in September, 6 men gathered for what looked like nothing more than a harmless social event. A small party, drinks, music humming from a speaker in the corner of a modest living room. The men laughed, joked, and played cards like lifelong friends spending a comfortable night together. To any outsider, it was an image of camaraderie and casual ease. Yet the truth was far more calculated. Hidden beneath their relaxed smiles was a secret that had been months in the making. Behind the friendly atmosphere lay a plan crafted with precision, discipline, and resentment. A plan worth $19 million. Before these 6 men slipped out of the house that night, they each made sure their hosts noted they had been present. They made small talk, left impressions, and checked the time. When the moment was right, they stepped outside one by one and changed their clothes, swapping casual wear for black sweaters, gloves, and masks. The house remained filled with the sounds of a gathering, but the 6 men had already left the party emotionally. Their alibi was set. Their minds were fixed on a far more ambitious purpose. The idea for the heist had not come from desperation or random greed. It had come from a man who believed he had been wronged. A man whose detailed knowledge of the Dunbar Armored facility made the impossible suddenly look attainable. His name was Alan Pace. Pace had once been a trusted employee. He worked as a security inspector for Dunbar, and his position gave him nearly unrestricted access to the company's Los Angeles depot. He walked through its corridors, inspected its vaults, studied its cameras. He learned the behaviors of guards, the rhythms of patrols, the quirks of the night shift. The depot was meant to be an impenetrable fortress, but to Pace, it was an open blueprint waiting to be exploited. He was known among colleagues as meticulous, almost obsessively so. He memorized details with the kind of focus you might expect from someone solving a complex puzzle. What no one realized was that Pace wasn't just fulfilling his job requirements. He was collecting data, storing it, analyzing it, and then he was fired. The firing wasn't dramatic, it wasn't violent, but for Pace it was deeply personal. His pride was wounded, his resentment simmered, and the knowledge he had gained remained firmly in his mind. In his eyes, the company had taken something from him. Now he would take something back, something far greater than a job. Over the following months, Pace assembled a small network of men he trusted, childhood friends, people who respected him, individuals who didn't initially see themselves as criminals. Some were hesitant, some were naively excited. But Pace convinced them all with a strange blend of confidence and logic. He told them that with the information he possessed, the risk was minimal. He promised that no one would be harmed. He reassured them that their lives would change forever. And for men who had grown up together dreaming of quick escapes from financial strain, the opportunity felt irresistible. The plan was simple to describe but extraordinarily complex to execute. Pace understood the depot's weaknesses down to the minute. He knew when guards drifted into the cafeteria for short breaks. He knew which cameras had blind spots during their record rewind cycles. He knew which entrances were rarely monitored. He even held a key, an exact replica of one he had crafted during his employment. The group studied the plan repeatedly. They rehearsed movements. They memorized their roles. They practiced discipline and silence. Pace pushed them hard, drilling into their minds that the only way out was total precision. Any hesitation, any mistake, would unravel everything. On the night of the robbery, the rented van rolled across the Los Angeles freeways, with the quiet confidence of a vehicle on a mundane errand. From outside, it was nothing more than a U-Haul truck making a late-night delivery. But inside, the men sat in tense silence, each one swallowing the weight of what was ahead. The city lights flickered past the windows, illuminating their masked faces for brief moments before dissolving back into darkness. When they reached the depot, the surroundings appeared almost eerily familiar to Pace. He had walked these grounds countless times as an employee. Now he approached as an intruder, yet he moved with the same steady stride. The side door awaited him, the door no one outside the company should have known was even unlocked at night. Pace inserted the key, turned it with a confident twist, and the latch clicked open. The warehouse interior was brightly lit by fluorescent bulbs. The air smelled faintly of metal, ink, and the subtle chemical scent of plastic-wrapped currency. Rows of shelves held stacked bundles of cash, carefully organized by route and destination. Millions of dollars moved through this facility every day. It was the beating heart of cash circulation for much of Southern California. And that night, it was disturbingly vulnerable. The guards on duty had no reason to suspect anything unusual. They were deep into their nightly routine, taking turns stepping into the cafeteria for quick breaks. Each one who walked through the door was immediately ambushed by the masked men. The attackers moved with discipline, swift, quiet, and controlled. They avoided shouting. They avoided panic. They bound the guards quickly and kept them face down on the floor to prevent eye contact. Some guards believed it was a joke at first, a training drill or even a prank gone too far. But the firmness of the zip ties and the cold silence of the masked men soon erased any confusion. Still, the attackers remained calm throughout. They stuck to the promise Pace had instilled from the beginning. No harm, no chaos, no unnecessary fear. The heist was meant to be a surgical strike, not a violent showdown. Pace directed the group with quiet precision. He timed the movements to the second. He led them through the camera loops. He pointed out which hallways were safe during each interval. He guided them to the vault where the cash sat waiting, bundles of various denominations stacked neatly on rolling carts. The scene felt almost surreal to the men. Money was everywhere, more than they had ever seen in their lives. More than they ever imagined they would touch. The loading process was intense. They moved with a rhythm that resembled factory workers, performing a well-practiced routine. But cash, especially in such massive quantities, was astonishingly heavy. Each bundle weighed significantly more than one might expect. Tens of thousands of bills compressed into bricks that strained the muscles of each man. Sweat gathered beneath their masks. Their breathing grew shallow. Time felt dangerously short, even with Pace's knowledge guiding them. At one point, a guard shifted slightly on the cafeteria floor, jolted by discomfort or fear. One of the robbers steadied himself, worried the guard might try to escape or shout. Pace quietly reminded the group to stay focused. The guard lay still again, frozen by uncertainty. The moment passed, but it reinforced the fragile nature of their operation. Success depended on composure. When the final bundles were loaded, the van's frame dipped visibly under the weight. Inside, stacks of cash filled almost every inch of space. It felt both exhilarating and terrifying to the men. They shut the doors, climbed into the front seats, and drove out as silently as they had arrived. The van disappeared into the Los Angeles night, swallowed by the maze of freeways and cold industrial lots. At dawn, when the next shift arrived at the depot, shock rippled through the staff. A vault that had been full hours earlier was now nearly empty. Guards, bound and shaken, recounted the events. The security team played back the cameras only to find endless loops of normal activity, offering no useful footage. Investigators stared at the untouched locks, the absence of forced entry, the flawless execution. It didn't take long for one possibility to rise above the rest. Someone on the inside had orchestrated it. But knowing that and proving it were two different things. Investigators began dissecting every detail. They interviewed employees, former staff, and anyone who might have held a grudge. And almost immediately one name stood out: the recently fired inspector with an unusually detailed understanding of the facility. Someone who had been vocal about his frustration, someone whose departure had been tense, someone who had both motive and opportunity. Alan Pace. But investigators had no physical evidence, no fingerprints, no surveillance, no direct witness who could identify him. The perfect crime seemed to be living up to its reputation. Meanwhile, Pace and his crew tried to integrate the wealth into their normal lives. But $19 million cannot simply be tucked away like loose change. It demands hiding, explaining, laundering. They had agreed to keep expenditures small, investments subtle, and lifestyles unchanged. But a fortune of that magnitude changes people. It changes decision-making, it magnifies impatience, it invites mistakes. And those mistakes were coming. In the weeks following the heist, Los Angeles carried on as usual, unaware that nearly $19 million had quietly changed hands in the dead of night. For Pace and his 5 partners, the first few days were filled with a strange blend of panic and triumph. They had done the impossible. They had executed the largest cash robbery in United States history without a single shot fired. And yet, the magnitude of what they had taken began to settle heavily on them. Money in small amounts is simple, but $19 million packed into bundles of non-sequential bills is a burden that demands strategy. The men knew that even the slightest display of sudden wealth could draw suspicion. A new car, a sudden vacation, unexplained investments, any of it could tip off investigators. Pace emphasized caution, slow movements, small deposits, gradual changes, but not everyone shared his discipline. To launder the money effectively, the group needed legitimate pathways, businesses, property purchases, quiet cash exchanges. They began by buying small real estate investments, parcels of land, modest apartments, repair properties. Some used relatives' names to avoid scrutiny. Others tried to blend into everyday financial activities. But each step carried risk. Each transaction required trust in bankers, agents, and vendors. And no matter how careful they were, the truth was difficult to bury completely. One of the conspirators in particular struggled to keep his composure. He enjoyed the thrill of sudden wealth far too much. The temptation to skip the long, tedious process of laundering money became overwhelming, and this temptation would eventually unravel the entire operation. He had arranged a meeting with a real estate agent in a quiet office not far from the coast. The agent, a young professional eager to close a sale, welcomed him warmly. They exchanged pleasantries. They discussed a property, a modest home the buyer wanted to acquire quickly. When the agent asked how he intended to pay, the man confidently said he would pay in cash. The agent blinked. Large cash offers were unusual but not unheard of. Still, something felt slightly off. The man reached into his pocket and withdrew a thick bundle of bills. But it wasn't the money that caught the agent's attention, it was the wrapper. Around the stack was a crisp band with a logo printed across it. A logo unmistakably familiar to anyone in the cash handling industry. It was a Dunbar Armored currency seal. The agent frowned, unsure of what she was seeing. She handed the bundle back gently and asked if he could provide bank-certified funds instead. The man nodded, appearing not to notice the alarm in her voice. But once he left the office, the agent sat in silence for several minutes. Something about the moment felt deeply wrong. A cold unease settled over her. And so she made a phone call to law enforcement. When authorities received the report, everything changed. This was the first tangible clue. The first physical link tying someone to the Dunbar depot. The band itself was damning. It was unique. It was traceable. And most importantly, it had no business being anywhere outside the vaults of the Los Angeles facility that had been robbed. Investigators quickly traced the buyer. They looked into his background. They reviewed his associates. And in doing so, they uncovered a web of connections that led back to a single name, Alan Pace. It was the confirmation they had needed. Detectives began interviewing Pace's acquaintances. They looked deeper into his firing. They analyzed old shift logs, and the more they learned, the more convinced they became that he was the architect behind the heist. But suspicion alone was not enough. They needed solid testimony, They needed someone involved to break. Pressure mounted on the conspirators. Detectives made quiet visits. They asked pointed questions. They watched bank accounts. And eventually one member of the group began to crack under the weight of paranoia. He feared being left behind. He feared Pace would sacrifice him to save himself. And fear, combined with guilt, drove him to do the unthinkable. He cooperated. His testimony became the backbone of the federal case. He led authorities through every detail: the planning, the timing, the roles, the movements inside the depot. He confirmed that Pace had been the mastermind. He confirmed the use of the copied key. He confirmed the gathering in Long Beach that acted as the perfect alibi. Piece by piece, the government built an unshakable narrative. When federal agents finally arrested Pace, it was a quiet morning. There was no chase, no confrontation, no dramatic standoff. He was taken into custody with the same controlled composure he had displayed during the heist. He claimed innocence from the moment he was questioned. He denied every allegation. He insisted he had been framed. Yet the trail of evidence, while subtle, was tightening with each passing day. During the trial, prosecutors painted a picture of a man fueled by resentment and emboldened by knowledge. They described an employee who had memorized the depot's vulnerabilities, who had turned his insider access into a weapon. Former co-workers testified about his precision, his intensity, his frustration after being fired. The cooperating conspirator gave the jury an inside look at the group's dynamics and Pace's leadership. What Pace had believed was the perfect crime began to unravel under the bright lights of the courtroom. The evidence was not a single overwhelming piece, but an accumulation of smaller truths. The currency band, the sudden property deals, the relationships among the men, the inside knowledge, the suspicious behavior following his firing. Together they formed an undeniable chain. The jury deliberated for only a short time before returning with a guilty verdict. Pace stood still as the judge pronounced the sentence: 24 years in federal prison. His co-conspirators received shorter terms based on their cooperation and lesser involvement. One of them cried openly, others remained silent, but all of them watched as the illusion of the perfect heist dissolved completely. Yet one mystery endured, lingering like a shadow over the case. Nearly $10 million was never recovered. Federal investigators searched every logical place the money could have been hidden. They dug through abandoned properties. They explored storage units rented by the conspirators. They examined bank accounts and financial records, stretching years beyond the robbery. But the money remained elusive. Theories began to emerge. Some believed the cash had been buried in remote areas of California. Others speculated it had been funneled into businesses under fake identities. There were even rumors that Pace, anticipating betrayal, had hidden a secret stash somewhere no one would ever find. In interviews from prison, he never addressed the missing money directly. He merely shrugged off the question as speculation. For the families of the guards who were held hostage, the emotional scars lingered. These were ordinary people doing routine night shifts, never imagining that masked men would ambush them during casual cafeteria breaks. They had been bound, threatened, and silenced. Though no one was physically harmed, the psychological toll remained. The guards later spoke about sleepless nights, recurring anxiety, and the unsettling feeling of being powerless under someone else's control. For Dunbar Armored, the heist became a catalyst for major security overhauls. New camera systems were installed. Employee access was restructured. Vault procedures were redesigned. The company realized that while technology can protect assets, the true vulnerability often lies in human trust. And trust once broken forces institutions to rethink everything. In Southern California, the story of the heist spread quietly at first. Only a small circle of people truly grasped its magnitude. But over time, the Dunbar robbery became a legend, a mixture of admiration and caution. On the streets of Long Beach and Los Angeles, stories circulated about the inside man who had tried to outsmart the system. Some retold the tale as a brilliant plan undone by human error. Others saw it as an inevitable downfall driven by greed, and others still couldn't help but wonder what happened to the missing millions. For Pace, prison life became a long stretch of reflection. He maintained his innocence throughout the years, claiming he had been framed, misunderstood, misjudged. But behind the walls, he also developed a reputation for intelligence, for planning, for a level of strategic thinking that few inmates possessed. Whether this was a glimpse into his true nature or a myth shaped by his crime remains unclear. Meanwhile, the men who cooperated with investigators tried to rebuild their lives. Some avoided the spotlight entirely. Some regretted their involvement. Some accepted their fate with quiet resignation, and all of them carried the burden of a decision that had changed the trajectory of their lives forever. The Dunbar robbery stands as a complex story of loyalty, fractured by temptation, of a mastermind undone by a simple mistake, and of a group of men who believed they could outthink the world. It challenges the myth of the perfect crime. It reminds us that even the most meticulous plans depend on human behavior, unpredictable, emotional, flawed. In the years since the heist, countless theories have emerged about the missing $10 million. Some retired investigators insist it must still be out there, buried in the vast, empty outskirts of Los Angeles County, hidden beneath layers of soil and silence. Others argue it has already been spent, slowly fed into the world through small purchases and quiet exchanges. And there are a few who whisper that someone still holds it, waiting, watching, carrying a secret that only grows heavier with time. But whether the money is gone or merely waiting to be found, one truth remains. The Dunbar robbery will forever stand as one of the most audacious, calculated, and strangely human heists in modern American history. It is a story not just of crime, but of ambition. Ambition shaped by anger, sharpened by knowledge, and ultimately undone by the smallest slip of carelessness. As the episode closes, we look back on a night that began in a quiet Long Beach house, with 6 men laughing over drinks and cards. A night that transformed from an ordinary gathering into one of the boldest criminal operations the country had ever seen. A night that rewrote lives, reshaped futures, and left behind questions still unanswered. This has been episode 2 of The Dark Ledger, presented by Elearn College. And the next time someone tells you that a perfect crime is possible, remember the story of the inside man, the van full of cash, and the single currency band that brought it all crashing down.